There's this core assumption marketers make, that all effort creates equal results. But what if that's completely wrong? What if the vast majority of your time and your budget are just wasted? The secret to scalable profit, it turns out, lies in a single rule that proves 80% of your activity is basically just noise. So let's dive in, because this one idea, seriously, has the power to completely transform how you think about growth.
Just let that question sink in for a second. What if 4 out of every 5 things your team does, 4 out of every $5 you spend on ads, are pretty much just static, background noise that produces almost nothing? This isn't about working harder, not at all. It's about a fundamental misunderstanding of where value actually comes from. We're all conditioned to chase perfection across every single stage of the funnel, but it's that very pursuit that blinds us to the critical few things that truly matter.
And this number, it really puts the scale of the problem into perspective. 80%. It's a staggering amount of waste. And this is the great paradox of modern marketing, right? In our attempt to do everything, to be everywhere, we just dilute our focus, and we end up achieving very little with most of our resources. The hard truth is not all customers, not all channels, not all funnel steps are created equal. And failing to recognize this pretty much guarantees inefficiency on a massive scale.
So here's the thing. This isn't some new marketing hack. It's a fundamental law of inputs and outputs. It was first observed over a century ago by an economist named Vilfredo Pareto. He noticed that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by just 20% of the population. And this became known as the Pareto Principle. It basically states that for many outcomes, roughly 80% of the results come from just 20% of the effort. When you apply this law to your business, it becomes an incredibly powerful, predictable engine for profit.
Okay, so today we're going to break down this 80-20 funnel rule piece by piece. We'll start with what I call the great marketing waste and the crisis that made this rule an absolute necessity. Then we'll look at the engine itself, the psychology behind why it's so potent, and most importantly, a blueprint you can actually use. We'll wrap up with the single most important ingredient, the courage to ignore.
All right, let's kick things off with the core problem, the great marketing waste. It's this pervasive illusion, really. This idea that just being busy and covering all your bases is the same as being effective. It's the belief that more is always better.
And this right here, this is the myth at the heart of so many bloated marketing budgets. The belief that every blog post, every social media channel, every ad campaign contributes equally to the bottom line. But it's a dangerously flawed assumption. It leads to what I call peanut butter marketing. Spreading your resources so thinly across every possible channel that nothing makes a real impact. And why is this so tempting? Well, it's often driven by a fear of missing out, right? A pressure to be seen everywhere. But this one idea guarantees you're blind to where your profit is actually concentrated.
Now, this widespread waste, it basically created a ticking time bomb. And it all came to a head during what we now call the customer acquisition crisis. Suddenly, because of some very real economic pressures, the 80-20 rule wasn't just a nice theory anymore. Efficiency was no longer a nice to have, it literally became a matter of survival.
What's so interesting here is how clearly this visualizes the problem. On one side, you have customer acquisition costs, or CAC, just skyrocketing. Competition got fierce, ad platforms became saturated, and it just got more and more expensive to get a new customer in the door. But on the other side, the lifetime value of that customer, their LTV, it wasn't keeping pace. This widening gap created a business model that was fundamentally unsustainable. You just can't survive if it costs you more to get a customer than that customer is worth. This intense pressure forced a radical shift in thinking.
So the strategy had to pivot, and it had to pivot hard. The old way, focusing on vanity metrics like clicks, impressions, raw lead numbers, and trying to acquire everyone, that was out. It was replaced by a ruthless new focus. The new game became about profit concentration. It was about finding and holding on to that small segment of high-value customers who drive the majority of your revenue. The focus shifted from the sheer quantity of leads to the quality of customers, because companies finally realized that 80% of their recurring revenue often came from just 20% of their loyal, retained users.
So how do we fix this? Well, that brings us to the engine of focus. See, this isn't just a philosophy. It's a systematic, repeatable engine for identifying and exploiting the highest leverage opportunities in your business. It's about turning that 80-20 insight into an actual process.
The core mechanism has 4 really clear steps. First, you analyze. This means meticulous, data-driven tracking of revenue attribution. No more guessing. You need to know exactly where every single dollar of profit is coming from. Second, you isolate. Based on that data, you find the vital few. That critical 20% of channels, or ads, or funnel steps driving 80% of the results. Third, and this is the most critical part, you reallocate. You don't just tweak the budget, you disproportionately shift your resources. You starve the 80% of noise to overfeed the 20% that works. And finally, you multiply. This isn't about small incremental gains. It's about achieving non-linear exponential profit growth by doubling, tripling, and quadrupling down on your proven winners.
So where do we usually find this profit core? Well, more often than not, that critical 20% is located in one of two places. The first is what's called the Tripwire step. This is that first crucial moment where a free user or a curious lead becomes a paying customer for the very first time, even if it's for a small amount. It's the pivots from prospect to customer. The second place is in your retention sequences. You know, the post-purchase emails, the upsells, the customer success efforts that keep your best customers happy and dramatically increase their lifetime value. Optimizing these two areas, that often provides the highest leverage in the entire system.
Now, what's really cool is that this system is incredibly effective, not just because of the math, but because it taps into some fundamental principles of human psychology. It's so powerful because it works with our nature, not against it.
Just think about the mental state of a team trying to manage everything at once. That's the left side of the slide. It creates an extremely high cognitive load. There's constant distraction, context switching, stress, and eventually burnout. It is simply impossible to do great innovative work in that kind of environment. Now look at the right side. When you simplify the focus down to the vital 20%, you create cognitive ease. This gives you deep focus and clarity. It frees up your team's precious mental and creative energy to solve the few problems that truly move the needle, which leads to better, more creative solutions.
But there's another, even more powerful psychological force at play here: loss aversion. This is a really well-documented cognitive bias. For most people, the pain of losing $100 feels way more intense than the pleasure of finding $100. We are just fundamentally wired to avoid losses.
And this is the genius of framing the 80-20 rule correctly. That 80% of activities that aren't producing results, that's not just inefficiency. It is an immediate, tangible, ongoing loss. It's a wound. Every single day, you are actively losing time, money, and your team's energy. So the decision to cut that wasteful 80% isn't just about some vague promise of future profit. It's driven by that powerful primal desire to stop the bleeding right now.
Okay, so we've covered the why and the how. Now let's translate all of this theory into a clear, actionable framework that you can actually use to master this principle in your own business.
Principle number 1 is attribution-based isolation. Your job is to basically become a profit detective and find your revenue clusters. This requires precise analytics. You have to connect every single marketing action directly to revenue. Which customer segments, which ad campaigns, which content pieces are generating 80% of the actual profit? You have to be absolutely ruthless here and ignore all the vanity metrics, likes, shares, even raw lead numbers if they don't correlate directly to cash in the bank.
The second principle is to identify the critical step. Somewhere in your customer's journey, there is a single conversion pivot. It might be the sales page, the checkout process, maybe the demo call. This is the moment of truth where a prospect becomes a customer. Once you locate this pivot point, it becomes the primary, almost obsessive, focus of all your optimization efforts. And why? Because even small improvements here have a massive ripple effect across the entire business.
So this is what a typical marketing budget often looks like. It's just pure noise. A little bit of money here, a little there, dozens of tiny slices, representing scattered, diluted, and ultimately inefficient spending across countless activities that produce minimal results. It's a perfect picture of that peanut butter approach we talked about earlier.
And this is the after picture. This is disproportionate allocation in action. You identify that 20% of activities that are low value, the noise, and you cut their funding. Then you take that massive 80% slice of the budget and you reinvest it entirely into the vital 20% that's actually working. This is the signal. It's about making big, bold bets on your proven winners, not hedging with 100 small ones. This is how you achieve those scalable, non-linear returns.
And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important piece of the puzzle. You can have all the data and frameworks in the world, but without this one thing, none of it matters. This part isn't about analytics. It's about mindset. It's the human element.
So here's the bottom line. Exponential growth is achieved through focused efficiency, not comprehensive effort. The real secret ingredient isn't finding some new silver bullet or the next hot marketing trend. It's having the discipline and the raw courage to just stop doing the 80% of things that produce minimal results. It feels counterintuitive, I know. It requires you to say no to good ideas to make room for the truly great ones. It requires the courage to ignore the noise and focus only on the signal.
Ultimately, the 80-20 rule really transforms your entire approach. You stop trying to force everyone through some generic process. Instead, you identify what truly delivers value, you double down on it, and you create a kind of gravitational pull. The best marketing doesn't push people through a funnel, it pulls them toward value, because it has the courage to ignore everything but the profit